Kyle Rollins didn't much care for silence, but it came with the job. The hum of the engine beneath him, the occasional pop of gravel under the tires, and the faint rattle of chains in the trailer were the only voices he'd heard since sundown. The radio crackled from time to time, a voice from another cab talking about storms in Oklahoma, but Kyle never answered. He preferred the static. He was 50 now. The years had not been kind, but they hadn't been cruel either. They'd simply passed, as indifferent as time could be. He lived from one long haul to the next, hauling food shipments between depots like a bloodline stretched across the Midwest. From warehouses to kitchens, farm to store. Nothing fancy. Just a job. A reliable, quiet life. He ate behind the wheel, slept in truck stops, and trusted only the things he could see in his mirrors. In another life, he might have retired by now. Bought a small place in Arkansas. Maybe fished. But that wasn't how it worked out. The rain had started around Wichita, heavy, not sharp. Thick drops smeared across his windshield like fingerprints on glass. He turned the wipers up a notch, leaned forward, and squinted into the fog-drenched stretch of Highway 400. Kansas was nothing but open land and open secrets. Long roads and longer silences. No one sane was walking in weather like this. That's why it startled him. A shape on the shoulder. Upright. Still. He caught it only for a second, but it didn't feel right to pass by. The kind of wrong that sticks to your chest. Kyle slowed down, his tires skimming over a fresh layer of rainwater. The lights from his truck fell on the figure now, just a man, soaked to the bone, one thumb held out like he'd been doing it for hours. He didn't wave. Didn't shout. Just stood there, patient and silent. Kyle's foot hovered above the pedal. He didn't usually stop. Company rules were clear. Don't pick up strangers. Too risky. Too many stories ended badly that way. But something about this one, maybe the stillness, maybe the eyes, made him reach over and pop the passenger door. The man climbed in without a word. Water dripped off his jacket and pooled on the rubber matting. His boots were scuffed, his jeans dark with rain. He wore a ball cap pulled low, a thin beard just starting to fill in. He smelled faintly of metal and wet road. "Thanks," he said, brushing water off his sleeves. "Car died on me a few miles back. I'm headed to Springfield. Didn't think anyone would stop." Kyle gave a short grunt in reply and pulled back onto the road. For a while, they drove in silence. The heater rattled in the dashboard, struggling to fight off the cold brought in by the hitchhiker's presence. Kyle didn't ask questions. He wasn't interested in talk. Some people shared their whole lives in the passenger seat, their jobs, their wives, their regrets, but this guy didn't seem the type. He just sat there, still and composed, as if he had rehearsed being invisible. It was maybe 30 minutes in when the man reached up to adjust his seatbelt, pulling his jacket sleeve back. Just for a second. Kyle noticed the tattoo. A strange geometric shape, angular, almost mechanical, with a string of numbers beneath it. It wasn't the art that caught Kyle's attention. It was the familiarity. A cold tap on an old nerve. He kept his eyes on the road, but his mind had already gone backward. 3 years ago, Kyle took a temporary job with a logistics company, fast money, strict NDAs, military clients. He was never told what was in the sealed containers, only where to go and how to handle the shipments. Black crates. Unmarked. He didn't ask questions. He needed the money. But one night, parked at a way station outside Fort Leonard Wood, a folder had slid out from under one of the crates. He picked it up without thinking, flipped it open. Classified. Project Enigma. Most of it was gibberish, redacted lines, military jargon, acronyms he didn't understand. But the image on the cover page stayed burned into his memory. That symbol. That same jagged pattern. And those same numbers, etched beneath like coordinates or serials. He'd put the folder back and told no one. Back then, he didn't want trouble. Now, that symbol was sitting quietly in the passenger seat, wrapped around the arm of a man named James. Kyle's hands tightened on the wheel. He didn't say anything. Not yet. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it meant nothing. But out on this wet road, in the middle of nowhere, coincidence didn't feel like a good enough explanation. He glanced at the man again, at the way he sat, spine straight, eyes scanning the road ahead with a precision that didn't come from boredom. It came from training. This was no stranded traveler. Kyle knew military bearing when he saw it. He turned his attention back to the road, forced his pulse to stay calm. Not yet, he thought. Not until I know more. The miles ticked by, one after the other. James, or whoever he was, said nothing more. He seemed content to ride in silence, watching the fog roll across the fields like smoke on a battlefield. Kyle could feel it now. The kind of tension that settles deep in the gut, like a storm's eye holding steady before the wind begins. He didn't know it yet, but this night was about to pull him backward, into a world he thought he'd long since left behind. And it had big asterisk in with a thumb in the rain. The windshield smeared with rain, 1,000 tiny lines trailing down like tears that wouldn't dry. Outside, the night had thickened, the kind of darkness that didn't just surround you, it pressed in. Kansas had a way of making a man feel small, even inside the cab of a 10-ton truck. Every stretch of road looked the same, like the world had stopped moving, and only the wheels beneath them remembered what direction was. Kyle drove with both hands on the wheel, not out of habit, but caution. Something in the air had changed since the tattoo. Something hard to name. James hadn't spoken again. He sat back in the seat now, quiet and still. The kind of stillness Kyle had seen once in a roadside deer that knew it had been spotted but wouldn't bolt until the last second. Controlled. Reserved. Ready. Kyle took a deep breath, tried to focus on the road. But the image on James' arm had already big asterisk in to twist and turn in his mind. He remembered it now not just from the file, but from the crate stencils, the chain of custody tags he wasn't supposed to read. That was when the pieces started to fall into place. Project Enigma had been a name whispered between loaders and handlers, never out loud, never twice. It wasn't on any official logbook. But the numbers matched. The same 6-digit string he'd seen on 2 containers bound for undisclosed locations, one to the Nevada desert, the other rerouted last minute to a base that didn't exist on any map. It was all coming back now. The memory he'd pushed down, telling himself it wasn't his concern. He was just the driver. Now the numbers were inked on a man sitting 5 feet away. Kyle risked a glance. James was looking straight ahead, but his hands were fidgeting. Adjusting the zipper on his jacket. Tapping his fingers on his thigh. Not nervous, calculated. Like someone who had been trained to monitor his body language, and now had no one left to perform for. The silence was growing too loud. Kyle reached over, turned on the defrost even though the windshield didn't need it. He needed a sound, any sound, to break the tension. Then James shifted in his seat, just enough to let the interior light catch his face. His eyes were different now. More focused. And for the first time since entering the cab, he spoke again. "You ever haul for the military?" he asked. It wasn't small talk. It was the kind of question that came preloaded with an answer. Kyle didn't reply right away. He could have lied. Said he didn't remember. But something told him that wouldn't hold up. "Yeah," he finally said. "Couple of contracts. Nothing long-term." James nodded slowly. "What company?" Kyle hesitated. "Northridge Logistics." That name hung in the air for a beat too long. James turned his head slightly, just enough to catch Kyle in his peripheral. "Then you already know," he said. "Or at least, you've seen enough to start asking the right questions." Kyle gripped the wheel tighter. He didn't like where this was going. James leaned forward a little, elbows on his knees, his voice low now, not afraid but deliberate. "You remember the shipments?" he asked. "Marked with no manifest, no destination." Just that symbol and a clock ticking next to it? Kyle didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. I was on the other end, James continued. Logistics officer, officially. But unofficially. I was part of the security chain that protected what was inside. And what was inside? Kyle asked before he could stop himself. James paused. Like he was choosing his words not just for safety, but for impact. We *P*NS, mostly. Not the kind you can find on an inventory list. Biological samples. Devices built by defense contractors that no longer exist on paper. I didn't know what half of it did. My job was to make sure it got from point A to point B without anyone asking why. Kyle looked at him fully now, the question finally breaking free. Then what happened? James leaned back, his hands folding. One day, it wasn't point B anymore. The last delivery didn't go to a base. It went to a private site. Contractors, not soldiers. People I'd never seen before. And the security? Wasn't government. It was corporate. That's when I started asking questions. And that's when things changed. Kyle felt his stomach turn. He had always suspected something about those runs didn't add up, the lack of documentation, the weird routing changes, the high-level clearance codes. But it had been easy to ignore. Not anymore. James let the silence return. But now it wasn't empty. It was charged. Like the air before a storm. After a few minutes, he added quietly, "My name's not James. It's Adam." Kyle looked over sharply. Adam didn't flinch. The alias was for protection. But they found me anyway. My car didn't break down, Kyle. I left it. I knew they were tracking it. I've been moving since last night. You picking me up was a risk. You should have kept driving. Kyle didn't speak. He couldn't. Because in that moment, he realized something he didn't want to admit. This wasn't a hitchhiker. This was a man on the run with secrets that could burn down the world. And Kyle had just opened the door. The headlines broke like thunder across a quiet sky. For months, it had been just whispers in backrooms, murmurs in Washington corridors, and off-the-record calls to journalists. But now it was front-page news. Every major outlet carried some version of the same story, a massive breach in military intelligence. A scandal rooted in decades of covert contracts, black budget *P*NS programs, and human testing buried beneath layers of misdirection. They called it the Enigma Exposé. Retired generals. CEOs of defense contractors. Even 2 sitting senators. Arrested in the span of a single week. Congressional hearings were scheduled. Whistleblower protections invoked. Names that once carried authority now smeared across a digital battlefield of evidence, leaked memos, and decrypted footage that could no longer be denied. What the public didn't know, what no paper printed, was how it all began. A truck. A storm. A thumb raised in the dark. Kyle Rollins didn't follow the coverage closely. Not at first. He still had deliveries to make, and a paper trail to erase. The files Adam had carried were gone now, transferred through encrypted channels, burned after broadcast, archived only in the minds of the few who dared to carry the truth forward. But Kyle had done more than drive a man across state lines. He had chosen a side. And it had changed everything. He'd left his old company months ago. Quietly. No farewell. Just one final route logged, and then he was gone. Now, his routes were nameless. His cargo wrapped in code instead of plastic. He drove at night mostly. Dirt roads. Back entrances. Shadows and silence. His truck bore no logos anymore, just a fresh coat of neutral gray. The kind of truck no one noticed. Some jobs were people. Smuggled from black sites to safe houses, escorted with quiet urgency. Others were packages, hard drives, documents, samples destined for labs that still believed in truth. He never asked questions. Not anymore. He didn't need to. He knew the cost of knowing. He also knew the cost of not acting. He kept a single photograph on his dashboard. It was worn, dog-eared, protected by a cheap plastic sleeve. A younger version of himself stood next to a supply crate, smiling in desert sunlight. Behind him was a medic named Donnelly, and another man whose name Kyle had forgotten but whose laughter he could still hear. He kept it there to remind himself. He still thought about Adam. They hadn't spoken since the airstrip. After the shootout that never happened, because Adam had known better. He had planned for betrayal. Had a decoy vehicle lead their pursuers elsewhere while Kyle and the Real cargo moved east. The plane had taken off under cover of darkness. No lights. No radio. Just the sound of engines and a mission finally headed for daylight. Kyle hadn't watched it go. He'd been too busy burning the trail behind them. A few months later, he received a small package. No return address. Inside was a silver coin. Military issue. Embossed with a falcon carrying a scroll. The reverse side bore only numbers, coordinates. And a single line. For when silence feels heavier than truth. He kept it with the photo. He never showed anyone. One morning, nearly a year after the storm that had Beg Asterisk in it all, Kyle stopped at a small gas station just outside Flagstaff. The clerk didn't look up as he paid cash for coffee and a sandwich. No one gave a second glance to a man in a plain gray truck with no plates. That's how he liked it. Back in the cab, he sat for a moment, watching the sunrise spill across the red earth. He sipped the coffee, burnt and bitter, and thought about Springfield. About the fog. About the tattoo. About the choice. There were no medals for what he'd done. No recognition. No thank you from the nation he'd served in silence. But that was fine. He hadn't done it for applause. He had done it because once, long ago, he had passed a car stuck in a storm, and later learned that a woman and child had died waiting for help that never came. That regret had followed him like a shadow ever since. A weight that time couldn't lift. Until now. Now, when he passed strangers on the roadside, he slowed down. When he heard something that didn't feel right, he asked questions. And when the truth knocked on his door soaked in rain, he let it in. Somewhere in the distance, another route waited. Another name that needed moving. Another truth that needed protecting. Kyle started the engine, the rumble beneath him familiar and steady. He checked the mirrors, adjusted the photo on the dash, and pulled onto the road. The sun was climbing now. And he wasn't just driving anymore. He was delivering justice, 1 mile at a time.